Morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will convene the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission for September 24th, 2020. And I'll open it up with introductions and announcements, and that's the announcement. So we're going to move on to 1A, review and approval of the September 24th business meeting agenda. I'll need a motion.
Clear here, motion to accept the agenda.
Okay, second.
And all those in favor? Aye.
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 Review and approval of the August 20, 2020 draft business meeting minutes. Anybody have comments or corrections to be made? No hands raised, Jared?
No hands raised, Ray. Do we want to do votes by unanimous consent?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, moving along, I want to thank.
We need a motion to accept.
Oh, I'm sorry. A motion to accept.
This is Tim Brady, motion to accept.
Khalil, second.
Thank you. All those in
I'm
favor?
not seeing any objections.
Thank you. So once again, I would like to thank commission members who are participating today. And hopefully you've all returned your background checks. I realize it was done in a timely manner. They gave us 3 days after receipt of the email. So hopefully everybody found the time to submit their background checks. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Ron Amidon.
Thank you, Chairman Kane, and thank you to all board members for being present and doing what you do. I'd like to give a special shout out to Dan McKinnon, Kevin Creighton, and their CARES Act team. The DMF CARES Act team has continued to lead the nation in advancing that program forward and getting the assistance to our folks that are out on the water as they deserve. And it's a proud time for Massachusetts to continue to be the leader across the entire nation in getting that program completed. So kudos to all of you. I would also like to expand upon Chairman Kane's request regarding the background checks. All of the board members present here today should have received background checks by now from the boards and commissions folks. And if you would, as he stated, make sure that those get filled out promptly and sent back. And if you could confirm for me the dates that you have sent them back by email to my office, I will make sure that my staff continues to monitor the approval process to ensure that it gets done in a timely fashion. Along those same lines, I want to take the time for all of us to thank Charlie Quinn for his time on the board, his years of service. As you all know, Charlie has taken a very big bite of the apple again, advancing his business into a much greater set of assets, requiring a tremendous amount of his time, and he would not be able to continue to provide his time and services to the board, but I want to thank him for his many years of service. I would also like to welcome our soon-to-be board members, Shelley Edmondson and Bill Amaro, to fill the vacancies that we have on the board. Shelley Edmondson, I'm sure most all of you know, has a PhD in zoology, marine biology, and she is replacing Andrew Walsh. And I know her paperwork is in process right now, and I expect to have them fully vetted and on the board for next month. Bill Amaro is a Cape Cod commercial fisherman who you folks all are very well aware of. He is a prior member of the New England Fisheries Management Council. and he will be taking Charlie's spot. So thank you to all of the current board members, and thank you and welcome to the 2 new board members. And we will have a full commission here within just the next couple of weeks. And that concludes my comments, Chairman King.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll move along. Director Dan McKiernan, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ray, and to your directive will be as brief as possible, but I do have a few things that I want to mention that aren't fully going to be aired later in the meeting. I want to echo Commissioner Amidon's compliments to the staff about the CARES spending plan and the fact that we were the first on the East Coast to be cutting some checks, and Kevin is going to give us a brief presentation later in the meeting, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But what I do want to say, it's projects like these that make us put a lot of value in the fishermen submitted and dealer submitted catch data, because not all states have that, and we do, and this gives us a great opportunity to use it for the good. And it's also in situations like this that remind us how valuable our staff are, who can manipulate and process the data. A shout out to Anna Webb and Eric Druskett, Nick Buchan, Kim Lundy, and the data entry staff. They work so hard, and we've been dumping more and more tasks on them because there's so much demand for fisheries data now. Even before COVID, but COVID is really making it much more challenging. So, you know, we couldn't have done it without them for sure. I would call them the most valuable team members in that program. I do want to mention other federal financial relief packages that have been announced over the past 2 weeks. The USDA is providing mollusk and shellfish farmers, which means our oyster growers, with a 10% payment based off of their 2019 revenues. And this is for COVID related. And of course, there's always this theme of you're not going to be able to be made more than whole, but that shouldn't be a problem with our CARES relief, which is going out. Actually, the aquaculturists in our state are going to receive their checks this week. And with these payments, because we did estimate that the loss of revenues by the oyster farmers was around 50% this year. And it hasn't made much of a comeback. So anyway, so that's interesting. And then that will result in about $3 million in direct payments to growers. And then another plan just prior to that was announced. This is the federal government's payments to fishermen for tariff relief. And in this case, there is a suite of species that were being exported to Europe and China, and were being subject to tariffs in 2019. And there's a whole bunch of money being made available for that on a national level. And many species are eligible, but not all. And each species has its own rate. The highest is lobster at 50 cents, flounders at 15, squid at 20, tuna at 13 cents. In other words, the fishermen's poundage or reported poundage from last year, they're going to be able to submit records to the USDA and get paid for that amount of money per pound based on their documented landings from last year. This will result in over $15 million in direct payments to fishermen, and that money should be in people's hands by the end of the year. But that's being managed exclusively by USDA, but we are acting as consultants to USDA because our job is to give the USDA a list of eligible permit holders and also give them a heads up as to where the data would exist. So many on the commission know that a commercial fisherman either reports to us their trip level data or to the National Marine Fisheries Service. And so, you know, you don't have to report to both. And so it's Anna and Eric's job every year to try to combine that federal data with our state data to describe all landings in the Commonwealth. And so that our job is to, right now, is to explain to USDA where to find all these data, or who to request it from in case they want to do audits. You're going to see a presentation today about a shellfish program and the challenges that they're facing addressing new federal FDA mandates about how to classify designated shellfish growing areas. And we are, like the CARES response, we are drawing on the talents and the knowledge of a lot of our staff, not just the shellfish program, to help figure this out. In other words, we've got environmental review team, we've got the pump out program, because what's in play is the mandate to reclassify growing areas around marinas, around mooring areas, and around sewage treatment plant outfalls. And so, you know, it's not just a shellfish challenge, it's a whole DMF challenge. And that's a formula I think is working well for us in CARES, and I'm proud of the staff putting their collective heads together to help the shellfish program. The litigation, we're not going to talk about this today, so I just want to mention the litigation concerning right whales and entanglements is ongoing. And we mentioned to you a couple meetings ago that per the court's order, we are going to apply for an incidental take permit with the National Marine Fisheries for some of our fixed gear fisheries. To apply for an ITP, they call it, takes more than a year, maybe two, but it requires a complete accounting of the fishery by us. We have to describe where the fishery takes place, how many participants, the seasonality, et cetera, and then come up with a plan to reduce takes. Now, that's not very hard for us to reduce takes on right whales, because we've only had 2 entanglements in stake year over the last 11 years. And of course, with the new upcoming rules, we would expect even fewer or a longer time frame between entanglements at all, if at all. But sea turtles are more common, and so our plan is going to have to try to address reduction in sea turtle takes, specifically leatherback turtles. But just as an aside, all of that data that we have to crunch, we have to present to the National Marine Fisheries Service. Is going to come out of the statistics shop in terms of number of permit holders, number of buoy lines, where and when they fish. That's all data that we rely on our statistics program to provide. And I just want to point out how valuable they are. They tend not to be the folks that are up on stage and getting the spotlights put on them, but boy, are they important to us. The next thing I want to talk about is at our last meeting, we relaxed the rules for fluke, sea bass, and striped bass to capitalize on remaining quotas. And you, the commission, approved my original recommendations for black sea bass and fluke. But we compromised by adding just 1 day to the week for striped bass commercial fishermen. And as a result, you know, the action was taken, and we got some pretty strong hate mail and some voicemails that were predictable but kind of unfortunate. And I would say that there's one particular voicemail that we got that contains some strong opinions and colorful language that's being saved by my staff as priceless, probably for my retirement party years from now. But I have 2 thoughts, and I just want to share this with the commission, that we did forecast in the March memo that in the fall, we probably need to increase days, not only because if the catch rates weren't high enough in the summer, but weather. And this week's intense winds are kind of an I told you so for me, because the first 3 days of this week were hellacious in terms of the ability for a boat to get out. Maybe yesterday afternoon a boat could have gotten out. And so it's kind of a lost week. And this is not, I mean, it was exceptional wind, but it's not exceptional on a monthly basis. We do get this a lot in September and October. And so, no doubt that this week's landings are going to be minimal for the striped bass fishery. And we described the challenges in the memo of fall fishing, small boat fishery, and so it's nothing new. But my thought for the commission is, and for the staff, there's no good reason that we should have to suffer through 2 controversies on striped bass in the same year. I mean, it's always difficult to manage striped bass. There's a faction among the stakeholders that would prefer to have no commercial fishery whatsoever, And so whatever we do in terms of our fishery, commercial fishery management, they're not going to be happy about it. And I think a lot of that hard feelings and firm, entrenched opinions simply resurfaces when we go through these kind of in-season adjustments. And so what I would like to see us do in the future for next year's is something that we analogous to what we do for our summer flounder fishery, where we write rules that say, as of a certain date, if there's X% of the quota left, that there's an automatic, relaxation of something, whether it be the trip limits or the days, or whatever. But it doesn't make sense for us to have to air that out again, because this was absolutely everything we intended to do. If you went back to the March memo, we simply wanted to add days, and I'd like the commission to endorse that kind of a system at the beginning of the season and not have to do that in season, especially the lateness of it, and a lot of the complaints that we got had to do with the fact that we took an action while the comment period was still open. Now, while that is legally allowed based on the regulations that were crafted to do this, it's still not the best way to run a railroad. It's not the best approach, and some fishermen felt undermined because they weren't aware that there was still that we were going to take an action prior to the full 14-day comment period. But regardless, we got tons of comments. We were very well informed about the views of the stakeholders. So I'd really like to see us avoid those kind of food fights in season. Let's create a striped bass management scheme that the commission is comfortable with by, in the preseason, and let it rip. I just don't want to do that again. So that's all I have for my presentation. There's plenty more that DMF staff and others will be bringing forward during this meeting, Ray, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Director McKiernan. Whoever is speaking on behalf of law enforcement, please identify yourself. And
Ray, before we change to the next agenda item, Suki has his hand up and has a question.
By all means, Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Dan, I'd like to know what the state approach is going to be to the Menhaden meeting coming up next week. It's not on the agenda, and it's this forage stuff and possible 30% reduction stuff is very concerning to Menhaden fishermen and the MLA. So I wonder what the state stance is going to be at that meeting.
Is Nicola on? Yep. Hey, Nicola, do you want to address the upcoming options?
I can try, sure. So what Suki is referencing is the fact that the board adopted the ecological reference points from Menhaden at the last meeting. So this will be the first time that we're using that reference point, which is more conservative to leave more fish in the water than the current single species reference points. We'll be using that to set the quota for next year for the first time. We're still waiting on the briefing materials, which will include a memo from the technical committee that looks at projections of what the quota could be and what that does in terms of how the resulting fishing mortality stacks up against that new ecological reference point fishing mortality target. So some of those projections will show, will suggest that cuts are required to not exceed it, depending on the level of risk that the board chooses to accept when setting the TAC. So there is a potential for an overall coast-wide quota reduction. That said, Massachusetts is very successful this year in increasing our quota by 40% through quota transfers. And in addition to that, we opted into the episodic event set aside for the first time this year. So even if there is a reduction coastwide in the quota, that doesn't necessarily translate to a reduction in access in Massachusetts.
Are we good, Suki?
No, I'd just like to say that I hope Massachusetts is going to be very supportive of the great need for Menhaden in Massachusetts for the lobster fisheries. I mean, the herring cuts were bad enough, but the cut for the state to be part of any reductions of the Menhaden quota is going to be very upsetting to the lobster industry.
So this is all in front of us, Suki, and I believe the state of Massachusetts has been very supportive of getting as much menhaden as possible for the lobster industry. You know, we not only have the issue here in this state, but you've got crabbers in the mid-Atlantic who need bait. So attending commission meetings, I know DMF has been very supportive. And as Nicola just mentioned, we've had a number of transfers from other states. We try to work in a formidable way at ASMFC. So, and I will be listening in on this AP call next week. So that's all I can say as Chairman Suki and a Commissioner at ASMFC.
Okay, I just wanted to make everybody aware of what was, possibly happening. That's all. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And how we felt about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You good, Suki?
Yeah, I'm good.
Thank you. Can we move along to law enforcement? And please identify yourself and give your presentation.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Chairman. It's Matt Bass. So you mentioned backgrounds, and that reminded us we are also starting some background processes for an unknown number of officers, which will probably result in seeing some new faces in a year or so. No, I can't say of any major earth-shattering cases in the last couple of weeks since the last meeting, but it seems like our court actions from the summer are starting to catch up to us this time. Although the courts, understandably, are kind of cutting back on the number of, or trying to minimize the number of people in cases in the court. So we're trying to deal with Zoom arraignments and whatnot as well. Also, in talking with Jared, we've a couple of adjudicatory hurdles. We're trying to get over, but Jared seems to be keeping a pretty good flow on some of the major cases and has a good plan to keep us moving forward. Although that's like I said, a couple of hurdles to jump through there. We still seem to be continuing to deal with some tribal issues. Lieutenant Colonel Moran is actually, I think, taking this on, working with both the tribe and EEA Legal to get us all, not just MEP, but there's local police. There was a nice incident with the state police on the canal with some tribal members last week. So we're trying to get everybody on the same page, firm legal ground for what is possible under their tribal rights. But that again is another ongoing issue for us. But Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. Any questions?
Any questions for law enforcement?
So he has his hand up.
You're recognized, Suki.
Yeah, Matt. How we making out with the issue that I brought up the last month down in the Cape Cod Bay area about guys with marking their gear properly and stuff.
Yeah. So the one person you were talking about in particular, he did correct his gear. He lost. I think we also, part of the issue with him is he was fishing with go deeps, and I think a couple of meetings ago there's supposed to be a subcommittee to discuss the issue with fishing go deeps. He has corrected one of them and took go deeps off what I think the west end, put a flag and marked it correctly. He did the size of the trawls, he did immediately reduce that, but he's still also requesting or awaiting an appeal to that ticket. So I think there's some other issues there, but those specific ones I think have been dealt with.
Yeah, I just heard still hearing grumbling from down there about not just the buoy stuff, but other stuff too. So
I kid you not, during this call, I've already gotten a complaint. So, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to see how it was moving along. That's all.
Any other hands raised, Jared?
I'm seeing no other hands raised, right?
I would like to bring it back to Director McKiernan.
Thank you, Ray. I did forget one small item. The commission members were emailed a memo that was prepared concerning the town of Wellfleet's informal request to us to manage the horseshoe crab fishery more restrictively, or to take some action there. And we took a look at that last summer. We were a little bit remiss in not bringing this forward quicker, but last summer, you remember, Ray, you and I and some of our specialists, Dr. Tracy Pugh and Derek Perry, took a trip out to Wellfleet, and we got a brief tour of the area and met with some of the fishermen from Wellfleet, being hosted by the harbor master. I'm sorry, the shellfish constable. And so I've asked staff to prepare a memo and to give me advice. And based on that advice, I have decided not to pursue a closure in Wellfleet Harbor for the reasons that are captured in the memo. Specifically, it's the benefits or the claimed rationale in terms of the bioturbation benefits and the associated positive impacts of horseshoe crabs to enhance settlement of shellfish. We just can't fully identify that as a legitimate outcome. And the area is really just one small area that is part of a complex of crabs that live in that whole eastern Cape Cod Bay area. We believe that the horseshoe crab management scheme is a really good one and is showing signs of success in terms of the abundance of horseshoe crabs, not only in Cape Cod Bay, but in Nantucket Sound as well. And we'd prefer to stay the course on that. About 11 years ago, we enacted these lunar closures, which did close harvest to the beach pickers during the spawning times, which was a fairly difficult decision and one that had a lot of impacts on traditional users. But we think it will enhance recruitment. And sure enough, over the last 10 years, we have seen some sign in our trawl survey that the stock is doing better. And this particular species is, this particular stock among the horseshoe crab stocks is showing some of the healthiest signs. Off of Rhode Island, the abundance trends are quite negative. Same goes for the New York, Long Island area. And we think that's a combination of not just sound management, but compliance with some of the rules, and also the fact that we have a limited entry scheme. We don't have an infinite number of harvesters that are tough to monitor. So anyway, so if any commission members want to take a look at that and maybe raise it at a future meeting and ask for either more explanation or a different outcome, we'd be happy to discuss that further. But we just wanted to put that particular issue to bed for now, Ray.
Thank you, Director McKiernan. I would suggest to commission members, present commission members and future members, that they review the brief that your staff submitted to you and your cover letter. This has been an ongoing issue with Wellfleet for what, 10 years, 12 years? And so I would suggest commission members read it and be comfortable with it. And if need be, we can bring it up at another commission meeting with presentation.
Mm-hmm.
But first, the brief has to be read, brief submitted to you. So that's what I'll say.
Thanks, Ray.
Can we move along now, please? Action to set 2020 Winter 2 scup trip limits.
Ray, Jared Silver will cover that.
Thank you. Jared, you're recognized.
Thank you, Ray. So the coastwide scup quota is between 3 distinct seasonal management periods, 2 federal periods, winter 1 and winter 2, and a summertime state managed period. The winter 2 period begins on October 1. Annually, we come to you to set the trip limits to match the federal trip limits for that period. The federal NOAA fishery sets the federal trip limits based on quota, and as quota can be rolled over from period 1 to period 2, the trip limit for period for the winter 2 fishery may be changed from their baseline. For this season, we're looking at setting a 24,000 pound possession and landing limit to match the federal trip limit. During that period, we'll be setting this by declaration. So we have an ongoing public comment period. We have received a small amount of public comment from recreational fishermen expressing some anxiety about setting the trip limits at such a high level. This could be residual from the striped bass decision, as we typically don't get public comment on these winter limits. But as the memo states, the stock is healthy. This is strictly matching a federal limit so that fish can be landed in Massachusetts, as our inshore scup fishery is not occurring at this type of limit, given the time, the gear restrictions, and and our state management of mobile gear fisheries. And as well, to address some of the issues with the recreational fishery, there is the commercial reallocation amendment that's ongoing at the ASMFC and Mid-Atlantic Council, and they're looking to potentially change the how the TAC is distributed between the two sectors. Currently, it's a 78-22 split favoring the commercial fishery based on late 80s and early 90s catch rates. So that, if that does move forward, that may address some of the perceived inequities among recreational fishermen. So for this time, we're looking to just match the federal limit and set a 24,000 pound commercial possession and landing limit for the period of October 1 through December 31.
So we'll need a motion. Have we got questions for Jared on this?
I'm seeing a question from Mike Pearnock.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I understand properly, the past few years, the commercial quota has not been reached for Massachusetts. Am I correct with that?
The commercial quota has not been reached for Massachusetts for a number of years now, correct? Yes.
Right.
That's the May 1 through September 30th summertime period quota.
It's always been significantly much less than what was.
Without having the numbers in front of me, I'd say it's typically about 50%.
There you go. Okay. Thank you for that. My other question is, with this action, would you suspect that they would be in federal waters catching these fish, or state waters, or both?
Well, I mean, the fishery can continue in state waters as long as the scup are available here. Our restrictions on our restrictions on minimum mesh size at 6.5 inches does not make it conducive to be a targeted scup fishery. So it's both the availability of scup in our waters and the gear restrictions that may limit that. I'd expect that most of this fishery is occurring in federal waters, and this limit would just provide those vessels the opportunity to land fish lawfully caught in federal waters in Massachusetts ports.
Thank you, Jared.
You're welcome, Mike. Ray, I'm also seeing Dan's hand up.
You recognize
Yep.
Dan.
Thanks, Ray. I just want to support Jared's points. The current percent landed is for the Massachusetts state quota is only 27%, and that's through the 19th. And so just for the commission members' edification, the quota itself is quite high, but it was established at a time when our regulations were different. Back in the 90s, especially the early 90s, we still had night trawling going on. We also had pair trawling going on with small mesh, or smaller mesh. I think the mesh at the time was 3.5 inches was allowed. DMF prohibited night trawling and put in the minimum size, the maximum vessel size. Those two actions deterred a lot of fishing effort on scup. And so we have not taken our scup quota in many, many years, and now it's the weakest. So at this point, I want to just agree with Jared and sort of support, that we're really talking about offshore trawling where the use of smaller mesh for targeting scup is allowed. I think it's, maybe Nicole can help me, I think it's 4.5 inches, and that's primarily that mid-Atlantic fleet. And so, if we don't enact this rule, what it means is the fish is just going to be probably landed in a different state, but it would be lawfully caught in the EEZ. We don't expect it to have any impact on our state waters fishery.
Questions for Dan?
I'm not seeing any further questions, Ray.
Would somebody please like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion, Suki.
You recognize Suki.
Make the motion to accept the proposal, state's proposal.
Need a second?
I second the motion. Mike Beardnock.
Thank you, Michael. Well, usually we have discussion after the motion is made, but we had a lengthy discussion prior to the motion. So I'm just going to go to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 So I presume that's a majority. I heard at least 4 ayes. Jared?
You did, yes. Ray, this may, continue, never mind. That's the last action.
Yeah, so the motion carries. So now we can move along. Future rulemaking for winter 2021. I guess we'll start with the turtle excluder, and I presume Aaron's gonna present on this, Dan. I could be
Yep.
mistaken.
I'll introduce Erin Burke, who's our protected species specialist. She's got a short presentation on this issue. It has to do with not the common sea turtle that we're usually hearing about, but a more local estuarine species. And then there's 3 other issues within this this topic that different staff will report on. So, Erin, you can take it. Yeah, this just if I could just another word here is that we did receive a report from the environmental police about a discovery that they hauled a trap in one of the south coast estuaries and found these turtles in this unmarked trap. And so there were violations to the individual fishermen about the fact that the trap was unmarked. But it was kind of an eye-opener, and so we're trying to get ahead of this, and what we've done is we've looked at some other states and how they address this. So that's what Evan's going to speak to today.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes,
Can you see my screen?
yes.
Okay, good. So as Dan mentioned, there's always been discussion about the potential for interaction between Diamondback Terrapins and traps that are up in the estuaries. But we've had this recent case, and given issues with MISA and some of our litigation, this is probably something that we should tackle.
And Erin, MISA is the Mass Endangered Species Act.
Yes.
Right? Which is,
sorry.
Yeah, that's our inland agency, the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife.
Right, and we'll talk a little bit about how that relates to terrapins here. So Diamondback terrapins are native to brackish marshes from Massachusetts down to Texas. They're a relatively small turtle. The females get to be about 7 inches long and the males are a little bit smaller. They're carnivorous, and their diet is primarily made up of fish and mollusks, snails and things. And in Massachusetts, they're confined to the areas in the South Coast and the Cape. So here's a map. You can see some of their distribution. They had a history of being a delicacy and were basically hunted almost to extinction. They have also had some population decline due to coastal habitat alteration. So given this decline in the population, they have special status or protections in all of the states that they range through. They have no overarching federal conservation status, though. In Massachusetts, they're listed as threatened under the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act. And while there are a number of issues with their ecology that make it difficult to get accurate population assessments. They're not a migratory species, but they range a fair bit in the estuaries that they live in. And there are issues with, the amount of survey effort, low detection rate, sex bias in their detection. A number of groups in Massachusetts are working to try to get a better handle on what the population size is and what their growth trends are in Massachusetts. So as I mentioned before, historically, the population took a hit from being harvested for food and from alteration of coastal habitats. Currently, that is still the case, habitat alteration, and sometimes, all of the threats are associated with humans, whether there's recreational off-roading in some of these marshes, and they have nest disruption to bycatch in intertidal crab pots. In some other states, this is more of a problem than it might be in Massachusetts, but we see the same pattern of an overlap in the habitat between blue crabs and diamondback terrapins. Relative to the blue crab pots, as I mentioned before, it's a carnivorous air-breathing turtle, and so they're attracted to the bait in the crab pots and they crawl in, and if there's no way for them to escape, they drown. This is a picture from that recent case that Dan mentioned in the Wareham River, and you can see inside that pot are a number of dead diamondback terrapins. So the blue crab fishery in Massachusetts is targeted mainly south of Cape Cod, and it's primarily a recreational fishery, in part because we have a harvest limit of 25 crabs per person per day. If you want to harvest commercially, you do need a coastal lobster permit in order to sell those 25 crabs. And if you want to use a trap just for recreational purposes, you need a permit as well, recreational crab and lobster permit to use a traditional six-sided trap. As far as our understanding goes, the most of the effort to catch blue crabs is recreational, and it's people using trout lines or dip nets. And there's no fisheries data collected on this fishery. So because it's possible for, depending on the overlap between the fishery pots and the turtles, it's possible for this to have a significant effect on the population. A number of other states have developed bycatch reduction methods relative to diamondback terrapins in blue crab pots. There's a number of ways that you can address this issue. The one that's primarily used is installing turtle excluder devices on traps. And there have been many bycatch reduction studies that have shown that there's little change in crab catch, but it greatly reduces and almost eliminates terrapin mortality. And these, as you can see, these escape devices look very similar to a lobster escape vent. You could also prohibit the use of certain kinds of bait that terrapins are especially attracted to, like fish, ensuring that you check your traps at least once a day, or putting time of year restrictions on pots or not allowing pots in certain areas. Here's a list of states that require or don't require the bycatch reduction devices specifically for terrapins on their pots in these estuarine areas. And you can see a number of states do require them, and they are very effective, and they're a relatively cheap solution. So these takes are a violation of the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act, and we recommend, since the fix is relatively simple, and this is primarily a recreational fishery, and the fact that this is a violation of MISA, And we're, already dealing with that on the whale and the sea turtle front, from the federal angle and the state angle, that these are takes that we should mitigate as soon as possible. Two potential options that we wanted to provide to you to think over are requiring the use of these turtle excluder devices on all recreational pot gear that's set in harbors and estuaries, similar to what other states have done. Or we could just prohibit the use of recreational pots in harbors and estuaries, given that it's a small fraction of the recreational fishery uses these pots to catch blue crabs. It's primarily trout line or dip netting. But those are two options that we could consider. Are there any questions?
Questions for Aaron from the commission?
I'm not seeing any hands raised, Ray.
So Aaron, as chairman, you recommend that we put this on next month's agenda? It sounds like you're looking for a regulation.
Yes, that is our recommendation. We can provide you more. This was just a general overview. We can provide you more information from previous studies about the effectiveness of the turtle excluder devices and their effect on blue crab catch and the catch of terrapins. Or we could do just a prohibition on those pots, given that it's a relatively small amount of the effort and it's maybe not something that we want to expand effort into.
So I'm reading two options. Jared, you could probably answer this question. Will this have to go out to a public hearing?
Yes, Ray. So I believe what we're looking to do today with regards to this is notify the commission of our intent to go out to public hearing with this winter, and to also determine if there is a preference as to which option should be preferred at public hearing, the prohibition on the use of pots or the requiring of a turtle excluder device, or if we were to take comment on both options. We'd be looking to have this at a wintertime public hearing, probably our typical January, February omnibus hearing.
Okay, well, you're talking about options here, so I would prefer that you take opinion on both options at a public hearing. Otherwise, you're going to the public hearing saying, this is it. Either number one or number two. That's what you're presenting. So I as chair would, and I believe commission members would support me, would prefer comment on both options from the public.
I'm seeing hands up for Mike Peardnock and Khalil.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two questions. How many recreational permitted traps are there, or recreational permits are out there? And then how many traps is a permit allowed to have for each individual? That's the first thing. And the second thing is I don't have a clue of whether this is something that's going on up by the near New Hampshire on all our waters, or is this a certain part of Massachusetts where you run into these critters and have this occur? I'm just curious.
Jared can probably answer the permit question. I'm not sure about that, but that is a great question. In Massachusetts, you can see here on this map, they're primarily in the South Coast and the Cape area, Wellfleet, Wareham, things like that. So it's not a statewide issue. It's fairly localized. And this is also where we see most of our blue crab population as well.
So they're resident to that area and they don't spawn or migrate offshore or anything of that sort. So it's consistent with the map or the chart.
Right. They migrate, quote unquote, within their estuary. They move around quite a bit, but no, they don't migrate inshore and offshore. They live in that brackish water all year round.
And typically, what's their range? A mile, a couple miles, 5, 10, or any estimate?
I'm not sure about that, but I can look into it and get back to you.
And so we've had these observations in the traps. Is it concentrated in one area more than another, or? Just curious if there's enough data to come to that conclusion.
Dan, is this the first time that we've had an enforcement case relative to this?
It is the first time that any bycatch has been brought to our attention. And let me try to answer some of your questions, Mike. What we're talking about in terms of the population of permit holders is our recreational lobster permit holder group. And the statute says that if anybody wants to set up to 10 traps for lobsters or edible crabs, you have to hold a non-commercial lobster permit. You also buy that permit if you want to go scuba diving for lobsters. So it's the same permit. We do not have a good handle on whether somebody is setting traps for blue crabs versus for lobsters under the authority of the same permit. So we really don't know, but we believe it's a fairly uncommon activity. There's used to have over 12,000 recreational lobster permit holders. That number is down to, I think, around 5 or 6. I think Kevin Creighton may know that number best because it's a source of part of our revenue because each of them contributes some funds to the lobster research fund. It's like $15 assessed onto each recreational permit. So we really don't know. But the fact that this particular person, A, wasn't permitted, B, didn't have any mark on his trap, it's one thing to write a regulation. It's another thing to locate these folks who are participating in this activity, because while it's regulated, this is like an artisanal, small scale fishery that maybe somebody's done their whole life and never realized you needed a permit from the state. So it's going to take an education campaign for us to do this. I think the best thing to do is to work through shellfish constables. They see people coming and going, and they may be a very valuable outreach conduit for us, regardless of what we do, new regulation, but or just whatever. But so there's, I think that satisfies some of your questions, Mike.
Thank you, Dan.
Oh, and the answer is 6,000. So our recreational lobster permit population has declined by almost 50% over the last 20 years. And the reason for that is probably the fact that lobsters have been fairly inexpensive over the last few years. Secondarily, the number of scuba divers is dropping due to probably the aging population, but also the presence of white sharks. And so for those two reasons, we have far less recreational lobstering going on in our state than ever before.
Are you good, Michael?
Yes,
Ray,
thank
I
you.
see Khalil's hand up.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of biological questions. I'm looking at it says listed as threatened under the Mass Endangered Species Act. I'm curious, Aaron, what the current population is, or estimated current population of these turtles, and if we do say that the traps have to be examined. A couple of questions, and we'll merge them all together, and then we'll try to sort them out. And if we do have a daily inspection of the traps by the individuals holding the permits, I'm curious as to if there's any biology as far as knowing how long a turtle is able to hold its breath underwater. I do know that they can, with reduced metabolism, et cetera, that they can hold it for, some length of time. But I'm curious as to what the population is. And then what happens is that, if we go from threatened to endangered, when do the laws change and the laws supersede any decision that, we might make as a commission?
So we talked with Derek Perry, and I talked with a number of people that study Diamondback Terrapin, folks at the Mass Audubon Society and some others, and there isn't a good population assessment across Massachusetts, sort of range-wide of terrapin. That's mainly been done on a sort of basin by basin, aspect, and not even across all of their potential habitat. There are a number of issues with traditional sampling methods trying to get an accurate count of the turtles, and they're working to fix those problems and hopefully be able to fit that information into a model that will give us a better sense of what their population is across the state. Right now it's been done, surveys have been done on a really localized basis, and they're still working out the kinks even with sampling method. So they're a tricky species to study. Now, as far as changing their status from threatened to endangered, I'm not entirely familiar with all the ins and outs of the MISA, but if it's anything like the Federal Endangered Species Act, there's not a lot of difference in protections and requirements between threatened and endangered.
Follow-up, Khalil?
Yes, Aaron, also, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Is there any physiology regarding the ability to hold
Yeah.
their breath for any? Obviously, they're air breathers. They will drown.
Right.
Is there any biology? Have any studies been performed then to learn a little bit more about their biology regarding the respiratory function?
Right. I'm sure there have been. I don't know them offhand, but if they're anything like a sea turtle, even hauling a pot twice a day isn't enough. They can probably only hold their breath for about 20 minutes.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I appreciate it.
Any
That's
other
all for me, Commissioner. That's all for me.
Any other hands up, Jared?
Ray, the director, would like to speak.
Dan, by all means.
Yeah, the third question that Khalil posed wasn't answered by Aaron, and let me take a crack at that. The relationship between the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife and the Division of Marine Fisheries is one regarding endangered species is one that a former commissioner tried to lay out historically with an MOU, because it would be awkward for your inland counterpart, the board of the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife or the Endangered Species Board to be regulating a marine fisheries activity. I can only assure you that it is their expectation that we sort of solve this so that it wouldn't have to get to that. And talking to Bob and Aaron and Derek, if we mandate this particular device, there won't be any takes of the species. We don't think, or if we ban the pots, there won't be any takes. And so I think it's our job to get out ahead of it so that we don't leave this issue unresolved for the other jurisdiction that has the authority to in some fashion to try to address it. So this is a nip it in the bud issue. Again, as Aaron mentioned, this is the first time we've even it's been brought to our attention that this has happened or is potentially could happen. And then when Bob and his crew and with Aaron put together that state-by-state summary, it was pretty satisfying for me, because we were glad to see that there's a solution. This is it's a lot easier to have something like this rigged into the head of the trap to solve the turtle catch issue, much easier than, say, the leatherback issue, where the vertical buoy line can occasionally wrap up a leatherback, and that has become a big point of contention in some of the Strahan suits against the Commonwealth. So, so to your point, Khalil, we've never had the inland agency managing marine fisheries activity, And we don't intend to do that because we want to solve this before it ever would be brought to their attention or require their action.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Khalil again here. Aaron, I'm looking at the status of species slide that's up in front of us. And I see that the distribution in Massachusetts, this particular slide shows the distribution from 1980 to 2006. Might the population or the distribution even be less now in 2020? It seems like this is a 14-year dated estimate of their habitat, especially in the Barnstable County area and in the Bay. Might there be a more updated slide or estimation of the range?
Yes. So before we go out to public hearing, we plan to get more up-to-date information as possible. So I agree, this is only current through 2006, and there are possibly changes since then, whether it's an expansion or a contraction of their range. This was just a general overview for you for these purposes, but when we go out to hearing with this, we will have as up-to-date information as we can find.
Understood. Thank you, Aaron. Might the distribution actually be less now?
It's possible, given habitat changes and coastal development.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Any other hands raised? Jared?
Not seeing any further questions, right?
So,
Thank you, Aaron. We look forward to, I guess, I presume there'll be another presentation by you on this matter.
yes, certainly.
Thank you, Aaron.
No problem. Jared, are you okay? I stopped sharing my screen.
Aaron, next to my name, if you could just make me the host again.
Okay. How do I do that? How do I make it?
There should be a more icon next to my name.
Oh, yes. Okay. And I'm going to jump off the call, but if any of the commission members have questions, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, everyone.
Good presentation. Thank you.
Ray, the next issue has to do with a ghost panel for fish pots, and this is a kind of a technical correction. So Jared's
Yeah,
gonna
before
cover
that,
this
there's
one.
haddock rule.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
I'm
yeah.
reading recreational Gulf of Maine cod.
right.
and haddock rules on
Yep,
my-
Jared's going to cover that as well.
Yeah, so about 6 weeks ago, back in the middle of August, NOAA Fisheries announced a final interim rule adjusting the Gulf of Maine cod and haddock recreational fishing limits for the remainder of this federal fishing year that runs through April 30th, 2021. This change involved three things. First was an extension of the fall for hire fishery for Gulf of Maine cod, adding in April 1 through April 15th, Gulf of Maine cod recreational fishery, and extending the Gulf of Maine haddock recreational fishery to include all of April rather than just the second half. We implemented the fall extension of the for hire fishery through a set of permit conditions to our for hire permit holders, and now we're looking to go out, and that was done largely for expediency, just to get it out there rather than going through emergency rulemaking. It was just much more clean for us, given the amount of time we had to turn around permit conditions rather than a emergency regulation. Now we're looking towards April, and for the April season, we're looking to go and adopt complementary measures, which would be in April 1 through April 14, Gulf of Maine cod season with a 1 fish bag limit and a 21-inch minimum size, and in April 1 through April 30, Gulf of Maine haddock season with a 15 fish bag limit and a 17-inch minimum size, and that would complement what's going on in the adjacent federal zone.
Questions for Jared?
I'm not seeing any questions, right? Mike has his hand up.
You recognize, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to thank DMF, Melanie Griffin, Dan, and all that helped get us to this point to get us some relief with the cod during these tough COVID times. Thank you for making that happen. Greatly appreciated by all. Thank you.
Any other
And
hands, Aaron?
I'm not saying another hand, Ray. And just to clarify, this would probably go out as part of a early midwinter omnibus public hearing package with the goal of implementing it by April 1.
Thank you. Moving along to housekeeping. Retail boat clarification on histamine producing species. Who's got this one, Dan?
Well, I believe Jared and I can deal with this together. The retail boat clarification is an interesting one because when COVID hit, we kind of sprang into action and we issued commercial fishermen upon request retail boat permits because many of the supply chain were breaking. Fishermen weren't able to sell fish, restaurants were closed, and it was a really tough time back in March and April. So many fishermen took advantage of this, and they pivoted their business models to try to market direct. And so we've relaxed some standards for them to do that, including waive the fees. But as summer turns into fall, we still have some of this activity going on, and people were wondering about being able to sell direct to the public, things like tunas. And that is a different issue, especially for the Department of Public Health, because there are strict standards on the handling of these histamine producing species that dealers must comply with under HACCP regulations. And there's a concern among the Department of Public Health that those standards need to be applied to anyone acting as a dealer off the back of their boat. So we're going to have to address that. One way would be to, in fact, what we've done to date is we've prohibited bluefin tuna from being marketed direct to the public, and that's generally been supported by many fishermen who are fearful that fish might be caught and peddled into restaurants. A retail boat permit is supposed to just be a transaction that happens, while the boat is tied up, at the pier. We do allow lobstermen who are peddling live crustaceans to take the product off the boat and to transport it, like if a lobsterman wanted to deliver some lobsters to a VFW hall, if there's a big event going on, things like that. But normally the retail boat is designed to be a transaction off the boat. Just as an aside, this has been difficult for many communities this summer or spring and summer when they wanted to not have big crowds appear when a boat with the use of social media is announcing, hey, I'm coming in shortly with my fish, meet me there and I'll sell it direct to the public. I mean, it was a great response that a lot of the public wanted to come to the aid of the commercial fishermen, but it also created some chaos for municipal officials because there was, especially in the summertime, there isn't adequate parking around a lot of these crowded marinas, and not to mention the crowd issues. So it hasn't been all success by enhancing the retail boat sales. But having said all that, we're talking today about histamine producing species, and we want to work with the Department of Public Health to come up with some standards about whether these histamine producing species could be limited, prevented from being sold off the boat, that the histamine producing species would have to be sold to a wholesale dealer that has a HACCP plan to maintain temperature. It may be easier to do that than it would be for us to have a fishing vessel develop a HACCP plan, because that's just too messy. So anyway, so that's the issue there. I'll take any questions.
Questions for Dan?
Mike Bearnock.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ray, you're going to have to help me a little bit with this. My understanding is that presently, if you are an HMS permitted vessel, that you can commercially land tuna. That there is a permit that I know the feds did something similar to that the state did with, I believe they waived the fees in order to be able to sell the fish directly from the boat. But I think it's similar to what Mass DMS presently has set up, that what the seafood dealer does when they get the fish, then the head's cut off and they clean it and so on, and then it goes to be distributed. That the way in which that handled is definitely subject to FDA requirements, which is different than if somebody just brings the fish from the boat and then directly sells it to somebody from the boat. And they're subject to different requirements than if you were the dealer that's going to take it, process it, and transport it. That's where, Ray, can you help me with that? That's my conceptual understanding, and I just want to make sure we're not implementing something here that's different at a federal level that would then change what you're going to do it wouldn't be consistent with federally is presently permitted.
Well, I think Dan is talking more about sale to the public, and you're talking about a charter, one of your anglers, they catch a fish and they want to buy the fish from you. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, this is no different than black sea bass, scup, or anything else where we gave flexibility for the commercial fleet to catch a fish, bring it in, and sell it directly off the boat at the dock to the public.
Well, the problem being on a state level, you can't sell fin fish over the dock.
Well, presently at a federal level, they're permitted to do that with the appropriate permits.
I know.
Yes.
But
So Mike, we are talking about raising this standard in Massachusetts, maybe higher than another state would. The NIMS is leaving it up to the states and their individual departments of public health with setting these conditions. So, you know, if Massachusetts puts a requirement on them to either not sell the fish over the rail or have some kind of icing standards, NIMS wouldn't be superseding that. And so I agree, this is something that we have to work out because some states are pretty lax about it, but our Department of Public Health is pretty uptight about it. And in Massachusetts, dealer permits are issued jointly under state law between the Department of Public Health and the Division of Marine Fisheries. Even though they go out on our letterhead, there is authority in the Department of Public Health. And when someone gets a retail boat, it's a dealer's permit. And so we now, in my view, sort of have to honor the desires of the Department of Public Health under, you know, when we issue a seafood dealer's permit, even if it's just to a boat, which doesn't see, you know, this is where it sort of breaks down. When is a boat a dealer? And so it's easy with a lobsterman who's peddling a live crustacean, whether it be over the rail to the public or to throw it in the back of the truck and run it. We got permission from the Department of Public Health to allow lobstermen to, with their live crustaceans, to have that opportunity. But we've not done anything on the finfish side. All that fish has to be sold off the boat on the finfish side and any other species. We don't allow any sale to the public of shellfish, for example, because it's just too risky dealing with that. Now the sea scallops was an interesting one because that was very popular, and that's still an issue that we have to work out with the Department of Public Health. But this is just about the histamine species. So I take your point, Mike, that this probably should be, if not ironed out, at least clarified with what message NIMS is sending out to the fleet, because I know they've been issuing some of these permits. But I'll bring in the Department of Public Health if you want for our next commission meeting, or get you some kind of opinion from them about what they would like to see us do with histamine-producing species.
Sure, Dan, because would this just be that the commercial fisherman is icing down the fish and taking appropriate measures when they land it and bring it back to the dock, and it would prescribe such, and then that's what they would follow? Or are they asking for more than that? Because I know there's a lot more if you are a seafood dealer and it leaves, and what has to be done with the concerns that are being brought up.
Well, Mike, currently, we've actually issued all retail boat permits with permit conditions, and we have not allowed the sale of tuna, period. So I don't know if we want to change that based on the input we get from the Department of Public Health, and maybe you all as an ICAT, member or someone who follows federal and international tuna management, maybe you want to weigh in on this in terms of the accountability of these fish if they're disappearing off the dock. It's hard for me to fathom what a legal sized bluefin tuna was, what a buyer is going to do with that.
Well,
So-
is this, I thought this was about histamine concerns, not about poaching.
Well, that is true, but it's a whole lot of fish that is challenging to keep iced. I mean, it's easy to keep a mackerel iced, but how is a charter boat or I'm sorry, a small vessel, commercial vessel, going to meet the needs of the public health needs about histamine producing fish when the fish is so large? It just seems like it's not worth it. But I'd like to bring in public health. We're bringing this to your attention
Sure.
for the first time.
Sure.
And so this issue needs a little bit more work, but
Yeah.
we're interested in getting your views and the other commission members' views.
But let me, and respond to one of your answers. If you are a commercial vessel and you presently have the permit that you can sell it right off the boat, you presently don't have the ability to do such in Massachusetts?
Not for tuna, no.
It's a fin fish, Michael.
So, Dan, may I take a
Yeah.
crack at an answer here?
Yeah.
There are federal guidelines, time to temperature guidelines that the Department of Public Health requires for the sale of histamine-producing finfish species. Under our retail boat permit, we allow for the sale off the back of the boat of non-histamine-producing finfish species, live lobsters and crabs. Our retail boat permit, we have conditioned to not allow for the sale of fish like bluefish or bluefin tuna because the fishermen, it's very difficult for the fishermen to be able to meet or demonstrate that they meet the time to temperature public health requirements. So that this would just be codifying that the sale of histamine producing species is not allowed under our retail boat permit, which is something that we've conditioned to this point, regardless of what the federal permit allows, because of the public health issue.
Thank you. We'll have to talk more offline to address this. I appreciate the concern and what I've heard here. I look forward to the future discussion. Thank you.
Sure enough.
Can we move along?
There's Matt Bass and Khalil both have their hands raised.
Okay, I'd like to take a biological break before we go to discussion items. So, Matt Bass, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the question may have been answered, but I don't think there's any contradiction right now with what NIMS is allowing HMS boats to do. They're just kind of covering where that fish goes. There's no sale to the public or to, they're not acting as a wholesale dealer in any way. It's just going straight to to their charter customer.
Khalil?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about what defines a histamine? What are the histamine producing fish? What are we basically talking about? All organic matter is might create histamines within an individual that consumes it. So what is it? What are the fish that we are concerned about regarding histamines?
For Massachusetts, it's bluefish and tunas.
So that's basically the two species.
I wonder if it's the scombrids. I wonder if it includes
It is.
some of the, like the bonitos are considered a tuna. Maybe mackerel? I don't know. That's a good question. We'll do our homework and come back with that guidance from the Department of Public Health at the next meeting.
Thank you, because obviously if you're dealing with lobsters. Lobsters are kept alive
Mhm.
and sold alive, but when you're dealing with a dead species and you got ammonia starting to be produced, et cetera, within the tissue, if it's not properly iced, that's going to create a problem. So I understand that you're basically worried about right now, currently the bluefish and tuna, but it may expand to other species.
Thank you, Khalil. I believe DMF has got further work on this with the Department of Health, and hopefully when they get together with the Department of Health, they will be able to come back to the commission and be on the same page with the Department of Health so they can maintain a conversation with the commission members. I'd like to move on to the ghost panel size for fish pots.
Jared?
Sure. So we were pinged by the ASMFC when we were doing our annual compliance report that we do not have black sea bass ghost panel or black sea bass pot ghost panel regulations that conform to the plan. We've apparently never had them, but just got pinged for it. So the plan requires a 3-inch by 6-inch minimum ghost panel requirement on all black sea bass pots. We don't have that. We just require that there be a ghost panel on the trap. So we have to make that minimum ghost panel opening a regulation. I don't think that this is going to be a challenge for those participating in the black sea bass pot fishery. My understanding is that most of the fishermen fishing this gear are rigging either the door or a side as a ghost panel, and that would easily meet the 3-inch by 6-inch minimum requirement. So we'd be looking to just clarify this in regulation this winter.
Like a technical correction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so we would look at it this winter and make sure it was published in time for the next commercial black sea bass season. Because
correct.
Right now, I'm hearing we're out of compliance with the management plan.
Yes, we're notified that our regs are not fully compliant in this capacity.
Right, so we'll work on this and make sure that the regulation is posted in time, so your commercial fishermen.
Yeah, we'll fix it for the 2021 season.
Thank you. Any questions about the ghost panel size for fish pots?
I'm not seeing any questions.
5-minute biological break. Be
All right.
back at 10:30.
Thank you.
Good morning, commission members. We are reconvening the meeting and we're going to move on to discussion items, shellfish updates. Who's got this, Jared?
Dan and Jeff Kennedy will be handling this.
Jared, I have 7 slides.
I'm going to turn the host over to you, Jeff.
Thank you.